They said the ring was buried with the queen. They said the gate beggar was nothing. A woman who had lost her name somewhere between a burning village and the first winter she spent without a roof, who now crouched at the eastern arch of Vareth Keep, with a tin cup and a coat so worn through that snow collected in the holes. They said she was no one. The council had said it. The pack lords had said it. Even the scullery women tossed crusts past her on their way to the market without looking down. What no one said, because no one knew, was that around her neck on a cord of braided gray linen hung the queen's vanished ring, and that the king had been looking for it for 3 years. What no one said was that the king was about to look down. The year was 843 by the Vareth count, the season deep into the frost hollow, a stretch of 7 weeks between the last of the wolf moon and the first thaw, when the cold became something alive and deliberate rather than merely relentless. The lords of the Eastern Conclave arrived in the 2nd week of Frost Hollow, with their horses and their banners and their very particular opinions about who should sit the empty seat at the king's left hand. They arrived through the Eastern Arch. They passed the Beggar without slowing. King Dorvan Kale did not arrive through the Eastern Arch. He came in before dawn, through the old service passage that led out beside the grain store, the way his father had taught him to move when a man did not want to be announced, before he had seen what he needed to see. He wore no crown. He wore a black wool coat rubbed thin at the elbows, and a hood pulled forward over a face that had never, even in his better years, been called handsome. He had a crooked jaw and a nose that had been broken at least once and maybe twice, and a pair of eyes the color of river water in late autumn that tended to notice things before the rest of him had caught up. He saw her because she was the only thing moving in the gray pre-dawn of the courtyard. She was pulling a cracked leather boot back onto her foot, and she was doing it with the economical care of a person who understood that the boot needed to last another season, and there was no second boot coming. Her head was down. Her hair was dark brown and braided back from a face he could not yet read. Around her neck, visible in the gap where her coat did not quite close at the collar, a small ring hung on a gray cord. Dorvan Kale stopped walking. He was not a man who stopped for nothing. He had walked through a burning hall in his 15th year without stopping. He had stood at his queen's deathbed in his 27th year and not stopped, because stopping meant becoming the kind of man who could not get up again, and he had not yet been able to afford that. He had spent 3 years walking steadily through councils and conclave meetings and the careful, murderous politics of a pack hierarchy that had chosen his queen for him once and was now selecting its replacements the way a man selects a sword, on the basis of balance and reach and how well it would do the job. He stopped now because he knew that ring. He knew it the way he knew the scar on his left hand. He knew the particular way the center stone sat slightly crooked in its setting, because Marit had not liked it perfect, had said a perfect setting looked afraid of the stone. He knew the gray cord, because Maret had worn it on a chain, and the chain had been buried with her. And yet, there it was on a cord, and the cord was around the neck of a woman crouching in the eastern arch, pulling on a failing boot. He did not move. The cold was extraordinary. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of dark amber in firelight, large and steady and entirely without the flinch he had come to expect from people who looked up from a courtyard gate to find the king of Vareth watching them in the dark. She looked at him the way a person looks at weather, assessing and unhurried, and then she went back to her boot. "Where did you get that ring?" he said. She did not look up again. Her voice, when it came, was measured and dry. "I found it." "Where?" "In the river. 3 years ago, in the spring thaw. The Rel, about a mile south of the first bridge." She tugged the boot's lace. Someone had dropped it in, or it had washed down. Rings don't tend to walk themselves into rivers. He stood very still. The Rel ran south of the keep burial ground. It was the direction the ground's drainage took in spring. "If you find anything of value," the announcement had read, "return it to the keep for reward." If you wish to make a claim of finder's right, present yourself at the eastern gate with documentation of recovery. She had not returned it. Why didn't you bring it in? He said. Something moved across her face, brief and careful, like a door opening a crack and closing again. The last time I brought something to this keep, they kept the thing and took something of mine as well. He looked at her. She had gone back to her boot. The morning was getting lighter by increments, and in the growing gray he could see the shape of her more clearly. Small bones, but no fragility in them. A stillness in the body that was not passivity but something practiced and chosen. The stillness of someone who had learned to make themselves as small a target as possible and had eventually made peace with needing to. What did they take? He said. She looked up again, and this time she held his gaze a beat longer than a woman crouching in the snow with a tin cup at her knee was supposed to hold the gaze of any man standing above her, let alone this one. My name, she said, and 3 years of my life, and the answer to what happened to my family. They took that last part in particular because if I had the answer, I would have had a claim, and claims cost the keep something. Dorvin Kale stood in the gray cold of the frost-hollow dawn and felt something in his chest do a thing it had not done in 3 years. Not warmth, not yet. Something that preceded warmth. The way a flint striking is not fire, but is the thing before fire. Tell me your name, he said. She straightened. She was watching him with those careful amber eyes, and he thought she was measuring the distance between him and the gate behind him, calculating the geometry of exits the way a person calculates exits when every room they have ever been in has eventually required one. Fen, she said at last, that's what's left of it. If you are still with this story, hold on. What comes next is the part the Vareth records tried to bury. Leave a thought if you know what it is to have your name taken by people who had no right to it. The name Fen was a fragment. He did not tell her yet that he knew what it was a fragment of. He had Marit's death record in his study. He had spent 3 years reading it, not because it comforted him, but because something in it had never settled correctly, the way a joint sits wrong after a break even once healed. The cause of death was listed as fever, swift and unexceptional, arriving in the 3rd month of the year 840. But Maret had not been a woman who died simply or swiftly or from anything unexceptional, and Dorvin had known that from the day he married her, and still not known what to do with the knowledge, and by the time he had worked out what to do with it, the fever had already taken her, and the records were already sealed. The seal had been pressed by his first counselor, Lord Edric Var. Edric Var, who had been the one to bring Marit to the court in the first place, to recommend her as a match of good blood and compliant temperament, to stand at the marriage altar with the ring and the cord in his hands and say the words of the bonding in his smooth, satisfied voice. Edric Var, who now presided over the Eastern Conclave and its careful selection of replacement queens. Dorvin had not moved against him, not yet. He had no proof. Only a death record that sat wrong, and a ring that had gone missing from a sealed burial chamber, and a queen who had told him once, quietly, that she did not trust the man at his left hand. He had not listened soon enough. He brought Fen inside, not through the main hall, through the grain store door, the way he had come, and then through a back stair that rose to the old keep mistress's rooms which had been empty for 2 years. He told no one. He gave her the room's fire and its small window and the blanket from the chest at the bed's foot, and she sat on the edge of the bed with the blanket around her shoulders and looked at him like she was still calculating the geometry of exits and had not yet ruled it out. I'm going to ask you to tell me everything, he said, from when the ring came out of the river. Everything you saw. Everyone who approached you about it. She looked at him steadily. And in return, I'll find your name. Something flickered in her face. Not gratitude, not yet. Something older than gratitude, more like a fist unclenching one finger at a time. She had been, he learned across the next hour and then the next day, Fenna of the Rellside Holdings, daughter of the river warden Adder and his wife, whose name in the records had been listed as Calla, which Fen said in a quiet, flat voice was not her mother's name. Her mother's name had been Cale, but someone in the registries had gotten it wrong, and her mother had not been the sort of woman to march into a keep and demand a correction. Her father had managed the Rellside crossing for 12 years, had trained Fen in the work from the time she could stand, had kept the river gate in all weathers and noted the water levels in a log that he kept locked in a box under the crossing post. The log had disappeared 18 months before her family was gone. Gone was the word she used, precise and dry. Gone was not the same as dead, she said. She had found no bodies. She had come home from a crossing in the 4th month of 840 to an empty house with the fire still warm in the hearth and the supper bread still on the board and no sign of her parents anywhere. And when she had gone to the keep to report it, the keep had taken 3 days to send anyone, and when they sent anyone, the anyone they sent was one of Edric Var's men, who had looked at the empty house and the warm hearth and the bread, and said that it appeared they had left voluntarily, and that voluntary departure was not the keep's concern. She had stayed. She had kept the crossing post. She had done it alone for 6 months before Edric Var's office had sent a letter revoking her father's warden commission and reassigning the crossing post to a man called Denth, who had no training and no aptitude, but whose sister's husband worked in the registry. She had fought it. She had gathered testimony from the river traders. She had walked to the keep with a petition and asked to present it before the Lord Keeper. She had been turned away at the gate, not turned away gently, turned away by name, by the specific contempt of a gatekeeper who had known her father and had chosen to use the past tense when he said it. Warden Adder's girl, he had said, this gate is not for warden's daughters who have no warrant. Come back when you have a lord's seal on that paper. She had come back with a lord's seal. She had gone to old Lord Kern of the Southern Holding, who had traded at the Rell crossing for 20 years, and thought well of her father. And Kern had read her petition and pressed his seal to it without hesitation, and she had walked back to the eastern gate and presented it to the same gatekeeper. He had let her wait in the yard for 4 hours in the rain, and then come back to say that Lord Kern's seal was insufficient as Kern held no precedent rights over the Rell crossing jurisdiction. She had stood in the rain for another hour. Then she had turned around and walked away. She had been at the gate, crouching at the eastern arch with her tin cup, for 2 years and 3 months. Dorvan Cale sat across the small room's fire from her and listened to all of it without moving. He was good at not moving. He had learned it early and perfected it across years of councils where the wrong expression at the wrong moment cost men their positions, sometimes their lives. He held the stillness he had built, but inside it something was working with the cold precision of a craftsman who has waited long enough and now knows exactly what he is building and why. Edric Var had revoked the Rellside Commission. Edric Var's man had dismissed the empty house. The Rell ran south of the burial ground where Moret's ring had been buried and had somehow found its way into a river, 1 month after the burial. Dorvan looked at the ring on its cord around Fen's neck and thought about what the river carried and from where. I need you to stay in this room, he said. She looked at him with those amber eyes that had stopped flinching at anything. For how long? 3 days, possibly 4. He paused. I will have food brought, and a second blanket. She studied him. He was aware that she was conducting the same calculation she had been conducting since the courtyard, still finding the exits, still measuring the distance. He did not try to stop her. He thought if he tried to stop her, she would go, and she would be right to. Why should I trust you? She said. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, asked with the practical clarity of someone who had spent 2 years learning that trust was a currency she could not afford to spend carelessly. You shouldn't, he said. Not yet. But I'm asking you to wait and see, And I'm telling you that what you're carrying around your neck is evidence of something that I have been trying to find for 3 years, and that the people who would want you not to have found it are still inside this keep." The fire spoke between them for a moment. "The ring opened a grave," she said quietly. "That's what I thought when I found it. Someone opened a grave to take a ring from a dead woman's hand and threw it in the river to lose it. Not to keep it. To lose it." Dorvan's throat tightened. "Yes. And whoever did it had access to the burial ground and a reason to remove the evidence that they'd been there." "Yes." She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at the ring on its cord, and she reached up and lifted the cord over her head and held the ring out to him in her open palm. He did not take it. "Keep it," he said. "It's safer with you." Something changed in her face. Not much. A degree or two of warmth, the way the sky changes one shade lighter in the east before the sun is visible. She put the cord back on. He spent the next 3 days in the deep part of the work. He found the 3 people still alive who had been part of the burial chamber preparation. The first was an old sexton who remembered a late instruction from a counselor's aide that the chamber's lock be changed to a new key, issued only to the aide himself. One registrar's assistant who recalled a gap in the burial ground's entry log, 2 pages missing from the bound ledger, the gap dated to the week after Moret's interment. One laundrywoman from the keep's lower service who had, in the spring of 840, seen 2 of Edric Var's personal guard walking south from the burial ground in the early morning with mud on their boots, on a day when there had been no rain. He set each account down in his own handwriting, dated and sealed with his personal mark, not the keep's mark. He sent them separately to 3 different destinations outside the keep. One to Lord Kern in the south. One to the eldest of the Moonright, the woman in the High Hill Keep, who presided over bonding records and whose authority predated Vareth's council by 2 centuries. One to the border captain of his personal guard, a man named Olt, who had served his father and would, Dorvan trusted, serve him still. On the 4th day, the Eastern Conclave convened in the Great Hall. Edric Var presided from the dais at the hall's head, with the 4 visiting lords arranged below him and the council at their customary chairs. He had, Dorvan knew, prepared a recommendation. The recommendation would name a woman of appropriate blood and temperament, which meant a woman whose family owed Edric Var something he could call in. It would be presented as the council's unanimous conclusion. It would, if accepted, place a queen at Dorvan's left hand who answered to Edric Var before she answered to anyone else. Dorvan walked into the hall from the rear entrance. He had put on the crown for this. He had dressed without ceremony in the black coat and the heavy chain of the Vareth mark, and the plain iron circlet that had been his father's. And he had walked in without announcement, and the room had gone silent in the way that rooms went silent around him when he did not want to be argued with. He sat. He let Edric Var look at him. Edric Var was a man of middle years with the kind of face that had been arranged by long practice into an expression of measured competence, and it was a good face, and Dorvan had believed it for longer than he cared to now admit. "My Lord King," Edric said, smooth and certain, "we were not expecting you until midday." "I know," Dorvan said. He said nothing else for a moment. He let the silence work. "Before the conclave's recommendation," he said, "I have a matter of keep record to place before this assembly. I am going to ask Lord Edric Var to remain seated while I do. If you have stayed this long, you have already heard the beginning of what comes next. Stay for the rest of it." The records tell one story. What the assembly saw that morning is another. Edric Var's expression did not change. He was too good for his expression to change. But his hands, clasped on the table before him, shifted by a fraction. Dorvan placed the accounts on the table. The sexton's account, the registrar's assistant's account, the laundrywoman's account. He read them aloud, in order, without inflection. When he finished, he looked at Edric Var and said, "The burial chamber was entered in the week following my queen's interment. The chamber's lock was changed on the order of your aide, Lord Edric. The entry log for that week shows 2 missing pages. 2 men in your personal service were seen walking south from the burial ground that morning with mud on their boots." Edric Var said, "These are the accounts of servants and an old man." "Yes," Dorvin said. He reached under the table's edge and lifted a chain from around his own neck, a chain with a key on it, and he set the key on the table between them. "That is the key issued to your aide," he said. "It was found this morning in the chest in your personal study. My guard recovered it at dawn." Edric Var's hands moved again. "I do not know what you imagine you have found," Edric said, "but the Queen's death was fever. It is in the record." "The record you sealed," Dorvin said. "As First Counselor, the sealing of death records of the royal house is my authority." "It was," Dorvin said. The 2 words lay on the table between them like the key. Dorvin stood. The movement was not fast. It was deliberate. The way a man stands who has decided something final and sees no reason to perform agitation. He looked at the 4 visiting lords, each in turn, and at each of his council, and then he looked at Edric Var. "You entered my queen's burial chamber. You removed her bonding ring from her hand and disposed of it in the Rel, because a ring taken from a live hand and thrown in a river is lost, and a bonding ring on a dead woman's hand is evidence that the bond was genuine and not the coerced arrangement your family has always privately argued it was." He paused. "You argued it was coerced because, if it was coerced, the Varith bonding line passes differently, and there are Var family claimants in the 3rd and 4th position of succession." The hall was entirely still. "You needed the bond to be questioned," Dorvin said. "You needed the record of it muddied, and you had a way to muddy it, if the ring was gone and the record said fever." He looked at Edric Var's hands. "You did not need her dead for that. All you needed was the ring gone and the record sealed." Something moved in Edric Var's face, finally. Not guilt. Something worse. Calculation, still running, still looking for the angle. "You cannot prove the ring was hers," Edric said. "A ring in a river is a ring in a river." The hall door opened. Fen walked in from the side entrance, the one that served the old keep mistress's rooms and led out at the hall's western wall. She had the ring on its cord, and she wore the coat that had holes in it, and she walked through the packed assembly of lords and councillors with the same unhurried steadiness with which she pulled on a failing boot in a pre-dawn courtyard. The assembly parted for her. Dorvin noticed that they parted, as if something in her stillness instructed them to. She reached the table. She lifted the cord from her neck and placed the ring in front of the oldest of the visiting lords, a man called Rive, who had known Marit before the marriage, and had, Dorvin knew, noticed the crooked setting and commented on it once. Rive looked at the ring for a long time. His hands did not move toward it. He looked at it with the careful stillness of a man recognizing something he had not expected to see again. "That is the Queen's ring," Rive said. He said it without drama, without the weight of a proclamation. He said it the way a man states a fact he is entirely certain of, and the certainty was worse for Edric Var than any drama could have been. "I recovered it from the Rel," Fen said. Her voice was clear and unadorned and carried in the hall's silence. 3 years ago, someone had put it there. Edric Var stood. His chair scraped. "This woman is a beggar. She has no standing before this assembly, no warrant, no lord's seal." Dorvin looked at him. "She has mine." Those 3 words had a weight to them that Dorvin had not planned. He had planned what came next, which was the formal stripping of Edric Var's counselorship, the sealing of his study, the summons of the border guard. He had planned the procedural elements with the cold precision of 3 years of anger transformed into craft. He had not planned the way those 3 words landed in his own chest, The way they landed in the room, the way Fen went very still at the table's end. She has mine. He had not planned to mean them in more than the formal sense. But they were true in more than the formal sense, and he was not capable of saying things that were not true. Not since Moret had died and he had finished learning that the people who told comfortable half-truths were the ones he could not afford to have near him. What happened to Edric Var was not dramatic. He was escorted from the hall. His keys were taken. His study was sealed. 2 of his guardsmen were found before midday to have been the men at the burial ground, and they were taken to the holding cells with the same absence of spectacle. The record Edric had sealed was unsealed by the Moonright's eldest, who had ridden through the night at Dorvin's summons and arrived just after the conclave's opening, and who confirmed, in the flat, authoritative voice of her office, that the bonding ring was a bonding ring, and that a genuine bond left a mark in the stone records of the Moonright's keeping that no counselor's seal could alter. The mark was there. Moret's bond had been genuine. The succession read cleanly. There were no Var claimants. It was done in the space of a morning. The visiting lords went to their guest chambers for the midday meal. The council sat in their chairs looking at the empty place at the table's head, where Edric Var had presided for 11 years. Dorvin dismissed them. He told them the conclave would continue in the morning and that its business was unchanged. He found Fen at the side door. She was standing in the passage with the cord in her hands, the ring free of it now, lying in her palm, and she was looking at it with an expression he had not seen on her before. Something more open than the careful amber steadiness. Something like grief setting down a weight it had carried for so long it no longer knew it had been carrying it. "The ring is yours to keep," he said. "If you want it. Or I can see it properly buried." She looked at him. Did she know? That the bond was genuine? He paused. Yes. Did she know about Var? She suspected. She told me once. His voice went dry with the precise dryness of 3 years of wishing he had listened more carefully. I should have listened more carefully. Fen closed her hand around the ring. Not taking it. Holding it for a moment. The way you hold something that belongs to a story you were inside of without knowing it. My family, she said. He had found the answer to that too, though he had not known, when he began looking, what he would find. Lord Kern had kept an accounting. The Var family land agents had pushed 4 river-crossing families off their posts in the same year. Fen's family was not the only one. Fen's father had kept a log. The log Kern had written in his own account had come to him through a river trader in the summer of 840, a man who had said a woman had given it to him at a crossing and told him to take it south and give it to the lord who traded at that water. The log had detailed the changed water levels, the new drift in the Rel's southern branch, the one that ran past a particular tract of land that Edric Var's family had recently purchased and whose value would rise dramatically if the Rel could be shown to favor a different channel. Her father had mapped the evidence of the river's manipulation. Someone had understood what that map meant. Dorvin told her this. He told her all of it, in the passage, in the quiet after the morning's noise, standing close enough that he could see the quality of her stillness change as each piece settled into the place the evidence had always meant to go. "Are they alive?" she said. "I don't know yet. I've sent Holt south. He'll find what there is to find." She was quiet. He watched her process the not knowing with the same practical stillness she brought to everything, and he thought about how long she had been doing that, holding the not knowing while the world told her the question was not worth asking. He thought about Moret. He thought about what it meant that he was standing in a side passage thinking about Moret, and also thinking about a woman with amber eyes who pulled her boot on carefully in the snow because she understood it needed to last another season. He thought about 3 years of not stopping, of walking steadily through things because stopping meant becoming someone who could not get up again. And he thought that this morning, for the first time, stopping had been exactly right. I don't know what you want from me, Fen said. She was not looking at him when she said it. She was looking at the cord in her hands. I understand what I was this morning. A piece of evidence in a good position. You were, he said. And I asked you to trust me, and you did. And I owe you an accounting for that. She looked up. What I want, he said, is to find your family if they can be found, and to restore what was taken from you, and for you to have your name back in the registry where it belongs, with the right mother's name next to it. He paused. And I want to ask you, after all of that is done, and you have what you're owed, and you are not standing in anyone's debt, whether you would stay. Fen looked at him for a long time. The passage was cold. The morning light came in through a high, narrow window and lay in a thin strip across the stone floor between them. Stay, she said carefully. At the keep. In the kept rooms. Not the arch. He held her gaze. I am not asking you to be anything you haven't agreed to be. I am asking whether, once you have your name and you're standing back, you would consider remaining somewhere that wasn't the Eastern Arch. Something moved in her face, something that was not quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one. You're terrible at this, she said. He considered that. Yes. Is that what you said to the Queen? No. She asked me first, which made it considerably easier. Fen looked at the ring again. Something settled in her expression, something that had been held away for a very long time easing down into a place where it could rest. She opened her hand and looked at the ring's crooked setting, at the center stone sitting slightly off true, and then she extended it toward him. Bury it properly, she said. She should have it back. He took it from her palm. His fingers were cold and her palm was warm, and the touch lasted only a moment. The ordinary brief contact of a hand returning something to another hand, and yet, when it ended, the space between his fingers felt different. The way a room feels different after a fire is lit in it. Not warmer yet, but no longer merely cold. Old came back in the 4th week of Frost Hollow with Fen's father and her mother, whose name was Kale and not Kala, who had been held on a Var land agent's estate to the south, under the pretense of a debt dispute that Dorvin dissolved in 1 hour with the proper seal applied. They were thin and older than they had any right to be, and they stood in the eastern courtyard in the thin winter light, and Fen walked to them without running, the way she walked to everything, steadily, practically, and then her father put his arms around her and she stopped being steady at all, and Dorvin found that he needed to look at something else for a while. The registry correction was completed in the 2nd week after the Frost Hollow. The name Fenna of the Relside Holdings was written back into the book where it had always belonged, with the right mother's name, with the right father's name, with the right commission attached to the Relside crossing post, assigned in perpetuity to her family's stewardship. The correction was witnessed by Lord Rive and by the Moonwright's eldest, and by 3 councillors who had sat under Edric Var's hand for 11 years, and who seemed, now that the hand was gone, somewhat relieved by the weather. Dorvin found her in the old keep mistress's rooms that night. She had been given the rooms properly now, with the fire maintained and the chest restocked, and she was sitting by the window looking out at the courtyard below, which was empty and dark and cold. She heard him at the door and did not startle. She was past startling at him. She had reached, somewhere in the 4th week, a point of comfortable wariness, which was as close to ease as he suspected she allowed herself with anyone. The corrections are done, he said. I know. The registrar told me. He came in and stood by the fire. She did not turn from the window, but he could see her face in the glass's reflection, amber-eyed and thoughtful. The conclave reconvenes in the spring, he said. Rive and the others. Yes. They will bring a recommendation. I know. He looked at her reflection. I am going to decline it. She turned from the window then. She looked at him directly, with the same practical candor she brought to everything, the same quality of measuring what she saw without flinching from it. "That will make the council uncomfortable," she said. "The council has been comfortable for 11 years," he said. "I think they can afford a season of discomfort." Something in her expression shifted. The door opening again, a crack, and then a little more. He crossed the room. He stopped at a distance that was not quite close enough to mean anything, and also was not far enough to mean nothing, and he looked at her in the way he had been carefully not looking at her for 4 weeks, which was directly and without the careful management of implication. "I told you I would ask," he said, "once you had your name back, and your standing and owed nothing to anyone in this keep." She looked up at him. The fire made amber of her eyes, not metaphor, but simple physics, the warm light catching them as it caught everything warm and real and present in that small room. "You did tell me that," she said. "You have all of those things now." "I do." He waited. He was good at waiting. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, somewhere in the keep's outer wall, the night wind moved in the stones with a sound like a question being asked in a language just on the edge of comprehension. "She chose you herself," Fen said. "The queen." "She did." "You said she asked first." "She did," he said. "She said that he was the least terrible of them, and that she was tired of terrible things, so she was asking before someone decided for her." He paused. "It was not a conventional asking." "No," Fen said. "It sounds about right." She looked at him for another moment. Then she reached out and put her hand in his, not dramatically, not with ceremony, the way she did everything, practically. Having decided. His hand closed around hers. He was not a man who said things easily, who opened the door in his chest and invited observation. He had spent 3 years with the door shut because what was behind it had nowhere safe to go. But standing in the keep mistress's room with the fire at their backs and her hand in his, the door did not require forcing. "Stay," he said. It was the same word, but it meant something different now, and they both knew the difference. She did not say yes immediately. She considered it with the same careful, unhurried process she brought to everything, which he had in 4 weeks come to understand was not hesitation, but respect. The respect of a woman who understood that some decisions deserve the time they take. "Yes," she said. The Varith records note that the king's second bonding was performed by the Moonright's eldest in the first week of the spring thaw, before the assembled pack lords and the Reformed Council and the 4 visiting lords of the Eastern Conclave, who had ridden south for the selection and stayed, as it happened, for the selection. The record notes that the bonding was genuine, as the Moonright's records always note, and that the new queen's name was entered in full. Fenna of the Relside Holdings, daughter of Adder and Kale, River Warden's line. The record notes that the chain of office was placed around her neck by the king's own hands and that the assembly witnessed it. What the records do not note, because records rarely bother with such things, is that old Lord Rive saw the crooked set ring on its cord still around her neck beneath the chain of office, and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying. Or that her father stood in the second row of witnesses with her mother at his side, and that Fen found them with her eyes at the moment the eldest's words settled into the record, and that the look she gave them was not the steady amber steadiness she wore in the world, but something entirely undefended, something a person only allows themselves in a room where they have finally run out of reasons to be afraid. Or that after the assembly had bowed and the visiting lords had clasped Dorvan's hand and the eldest had packed her great book and departed, and the hall was emptying into the long gold quiet of the first thaw afternoon, Dorvan stood at the head of the dais and looked at Fen, and she looked back at him. And neither of them said anything because there was nothing left to say that the morning had not already said. Her name was in the book. The right name, her mother's name beside it, her father's name beside that, the commission in perpetuity at the Relside crossing, the correction dated and witnessed and sealed. The river still ran south of the keep. In spring it was clear and quick and cold, running over the stones the way it had always run, carrying what it carried, dropping what it dropped. She had pulled his queen's ring from that water. She had kept it safe for 3 years on a cord of braided gray linen, crouching at the eastern arch with a tin cup and a coat with holes in it, while the world looked past her. He had looked down. She was still there.